Welcome to the Flagrant Foul Fantasy Show. We focus on three major sports, the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB. And we try to give you the best content to win your fantasy leagues. Again, welcome and thank you for listening. We are now available on our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Samsung Podcasts, and Podchaser. Along with that, don't forget to follow us on our Facebook page, X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Tumblr. And please subscribe, follow, share, like, comment, or whatever you feel like. I hope you enjoy this episode. Before we get into this episode, I want to apologize for not getting episodes out last week. My father ended up having a stroke, so I've been focusing a lot on helping him get back on his feet and getting him into a better situation. Due to this, fantasy football has taken a back seat, but I'm back and I'm ready to go. Welcome. In this episode, we'll be diving deep into the tight end position. There's no good way about drafting this position, as there's only about 5 or 6 guys that will produce consistently. But if you want them, you're going to have to give up one of your early round picks. This is probably the hardest position to decide what to do, so I'll be looking at all of the starting tight ends, ADPs, and putting them into tiers. Along with that, I'll be telling you which ones are great at that spot, which ones you can reach for, and which ones to stay away from, or at least wait until a round or two later. I'll be looking at guys as if anyone in each tier could be drafted before or after a guy in that tier, and I could see it happening and not think, what the hell were they drinking or smoking? Some tiers will be smaller and some tiers larger. I hope you enjoy this episode. The first tier consists of 2 tight ends, Sam Laporta and Travis Kelce. I really like both these guys this season, but who doesn't? Getting them is going to cost you an early round pick or some big money in auction leagues. The first of the two, tight end number 1 on ESPN and Sleeper this year, is second-year tight end out of Detroit, Sam Laporta. He burst onto the scene last year and never stopped, finishing at the top of this by the season's end. As of right now, ESPN has him ranked 36th, and Sleeper has him going 20th. Based on mocks, I've been seeing him go around Sleeper's projections and nowhere near ESPN's. Taking Laporta will give you an advantage over almost everyone else in your league, due to the low scoring production at the position. But I'd feel a lot better about waiting and either taking a wideout or a back in round 2. If he falls to round 3, go ahead and take him, because at least you're already going to have at least 1 or 2 elite receivers or backs. If he doesn't fall to round 3, there are other great options in Kels, McBride, Andrews, and Kittles that can be drafted elsewhere, anywhere between rounds 3 and 5. The next tight end off the board should be Travis Kelce. A top 3 tight end his entire career, has had his best seasons ever since Patrick Mahomes arrived. Being the first or second target on the receiving end of the best quarterback in the NFL does have its advantages. Last year was considered an off year for both Kelce and Mahomes, and Kelce was still able to finish as a tight end 3, averaging 14.6 points per game. Kelce is projected to go 37th on ESPN and 23rd on Sleeper. And for me, I don't mind taking Kelce here. It's the latest he's been projected to go in years, and he still will be putting up great numbers at the position. With Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy on the outside, now it should allow Kelce to be open more in the middle of the field. For me, I would take him at his ADP in a heartbeat. The second tier consists of Trey McBride, Mark Andrews, Kyle Pitts, George Kittle, Evan Ingram, and TJ Hawkinson. When one of these guys gets picked, the dominoes will start to fall with the rest. This tier has guys that have proven to be fantasy assets year in and year out, and guys that are hopefully on the midst of their breakout season. The first guy on this list is Trey McBride. The Colorado State product had his name called when Zach Ertz went on the IR last year, and boy did he take advantage of his time. Over the second half of the season with Kyler back at quarterback, McBride averaged 14.8 points per game. With Hollywood gone and Marvin Harrison Jr. in, it is looking like Jr. and McBride will be tasked with leading the receiving game this season. And the Cardinals aren't expected to have a great defense again this year either, meaning there's a good chance they'll be behind in quite a few games. If McBride can keep up his consistency he showed late last year, he could finish as the tight end 1 by the end of the year. McBride's current ADP is 56th on ESPN, right after Andrews, and is 45th on Sleeper, right before him. McBride has a ton of upside this season, and with being projected to go in the 4th or 5th round, he's not at a Brad price either. If you feel like you were good at running back and wideout, take him. If not, maybe wait for one of the other guys in this tier that's projected to go later. And as I just said, the other tight end going around McBride is Mark Andrews. His ADP is 51 on ESPN and 46 on Sleeper. Andrews has been a top tight end choice for his entire career, and there's no lack of connection between star tight end and his star quarterback Lamar Jackson. What has made Andrews slip this year is that he's coming off a season-ending ankle injury, and when Andrews hasn't been hurt, Jackson seems to be the one that's hurt. This has capped Andrews' ceiling quite a bit, but not enough to worry about him not producing for your team. He's still the number 1 or number 2 receiving option on one of the top offenses in the league, and now he's going to be going later than he has in years. The only competition he has this season is Zay Flowers. To me, he's Travis Kelce light. Just as McBride before, he's great at his current ADP, but due to coming off an injury and just getting injured this preseason in a car crash, I wouldn't reach for Andrews like some may for McBride. Up next in this tier is Kyle Pitts. His ADP is 75 on ESPN and 54 on Sleeper, right around Kincaid on both platforms. The Falcons tight end has fallen short of expectations every single season. He's considered the best tight end prospect in NFL history, but we just haven't seen it. We can't put most of that on him, though. As I said with the Drake London during the wide receiver episode, the Atlanta offense has been as dysfunctional as they come the last few seasons, with shoddy quarterback play and boneheaded decisions by former head coach Arthur Smith. With a new head coach and quarterback in Kirk Cousins, who just happens to utilize his tight ends more than anyone else not named Mahomes, Pitts should finally have the breakout season we've been hoping for since he had 1,000 yards his rookie year. If he doesn't, and we all fall for the Kyle Pitts hype train one more time, I don't think we'll be seeing his name this early in draft next season. I'm high on London and Pitts this year, and I've never really been high on either of them, so I'm hoping this is the time is the real deal and we can finally see why Pitts was so coveted out of Florida. He has the highest ceiling, but the lowest floor of anyone in this tier. After Pitts is George Kittle. The longtime 49er has produced each and every year, finishing in the top 5 at the position all but once, and that was due to injuries. Though talking about injuries, Kittle is known for playing hard and angry, and that is where all the injuries have piled up over the years. They have not stopped him from playing, which is good, but his production has fluctuated at times. And Kittle is coming off core muscle surgery from this offseason, so there is the added risk too. But none of this scares me, though. He's still a top option at the position and one of the best offenses in the league, and playing with backs and receivers that are just as injury-prone as him. Kittle led all tight ends in yards last year with 1,020 on a career-high 11.3 yards per target. Even if he starts slow due to his surgery, he'll more than make up for it down the line. He's a great pick at his current ADP of 73 on ESPN and 56 on Sleeper. The next guy up, some have debated me on, but I feel like he belongs in this tier due to his production since becoming a Jaguar. Evan Ingram was looked as a top threat at the position coming into the league 7 years ago, and in the early part of his career, it never really materialized, as he was constantly injured and on an underwhelming Giants offense. But since becoming a Jaguar, Ingram has been able to show us what he can do when healthy and on a good team, and that's finishing as a top 5 at the position. In his 2 seasons in Jacksonville, he's finished as the tight end 5 and in the tight end 2. And with not much change in the offense besides swapping a few receivers, Ingram should finish right around this mark again. His ADP is 57 on ESPN and 67 on Sleeper. And the last guy in this tier is TJ Hawkinson. Hawkinson has been a star at the position ever since making his Minnesota debut. If he wasn't coming off an ACL and MCL tear, I would have had him in tier 1 even with the quarterback change. Sadly, he is, and most likely won't be ready for the season until the season is already half over. Before this injury, he averaged 14.6 points per game, which would have had him right between Kels and Laporta on points per game basis. No better company to have, in my opinion. His current ADP is 112 on ESPN and 110 on Sleeper. This should allow you to get anywhere from rounds 9 to 12 depending on how your league drafts at the position. If you think you can wait until the middle of the season for his return, draft him. If not, stay away. It's as simple as that. The third tier consists of Dalton Kincaid, David Njoku, Dallas Goedert, Pat Freiermuth, Dalton Schultz, and Jake Ferguson. These guys aren't going to produce every week, but should still be able to give you more boom than bust on a week-to-week basis. Based on their current projections, Kincaid is slated to go off the board in rounds 5 through 7. His ADP is 74 on ESPN and 50th on Sleeper. One of the only returning receiving options in the Bills' offense this year, Kincaid has a chance to produce in the middle of the field. With Diggs and Davis gone, there are 152 receptions that presumably are unaccounted for this year. There is rookie receiver Keon Coleman that's going to be getting a lot of preseason hype, and I really like Curtis Samuel too, but there should be more than enough targets for Kincaid as well. Is he my favorite in this tier? Well, no. He might actually be my least favorite at his current ADP, but he's still going to produce respectable fantasy numbers at the position. I think he's a reach on Sleeper, but I do not see him lasting as long as ESPN has him. He should go somewhere in the middle, like late round 6, but he won't be on my roster due to still competing with Dawson Knox. After that is David Njoku. He is entering his 8th season and coming off the best season of his career, finishing 6th at the position, averaging 12.6 points per game. The former first-round pick showed us why he was drafted so high many years ago. His abilities are not what concerns me, though. What does is that he did not really take off last year until Watson was out and Flacco was in. There should be some regression this year with a fantasy standpoint, which should still put him within the top 10. Just temper your expectations if you're looking at last year's production and expecting a repeat. His current ADP is 100 on ESPN and 84 on Sleeper, with an expected draft range of 8th or 9th round. After Njoku is Dallas Goedert. Goedert has been the third option on the Eagles' high-powered offense since Zach Ertz was traded. That changes this season. With the arrival of Saquon Barkley, Goedert most likely will be receiving a lot less looks. This doesn't bode well for his fantasy production. Along with that, he's never played a full season in his career. That also doesn't bode well for his production. If you're high on Goddard, go ahead and take him. If you're like me and think he will have a decrease in production, that'll either don't take him at his current ADP or at least wait and see if he drops and get him at a cheaper price. He currently is ranked 110th on ESPN and 102nd on Sleeper. He should be taken off the board in rounds 8 through 11, but I prefer the latter. Moving on to the other Pennsylvania team, we have Pat Freiermuth of the Steelers, or as the Yinzers call him, Muth. Last year was an off year for Muth, who had spent quite a bit of the time on the IR due to a hamstring injury. This was his first serious injury of his career, and when he was available, he only had a few boom games, with the majority being 7 points or less. I can't really put any of that on him, though, as every pass catcher in that offense suffered with Kenny Pickett at quarterback. This season, he should at least have a chance to produce with Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. And I'm not saying it will happen, but he should at least have a chance. Freiermuth is one of the most underrated tight ends in the league due to being on a run-first offense. But that doesn't seem to be changing either. With Arthur Smith and the new OC of the Steel City, it looks to be more run-heavy than ever. They will have to air the ball out, too, though. With Deontay Johnson gone and no real threat besides George Pickens and maybe Van Jefferson, Muth will have a better fantasy season. It just might be a little bit of a roller coaster. So as the Sharks on Shark Tanks would say, and for that reason, I'm out. I'm a big Muth fan, but I just don't like the situation. His current ADP is 135 on ESPN and 126 on Sleeper. Based on those projections, he's slated to go off the boards in round 11 through 13, but I've seen him go off the board in rounds 8 and 9 in mocks. Up next, we have Dalton Schultz. The former Dallas Cowboys tight end finished at tight end 10 in the first year in Houston. Having then rookie quarterback C.J. Stroud had many thinking that Schultz's best years were behind him, but those thoughts were as wrong can get. He still put up together numbers that were relatively the same as his years in Dallas, and this was all due to being in one of the pass-heaviest offenses in the league and with Stroud showing his brilliance as a pocket passer. This year should be a little harder with the arrival of Stephon Diggs. The trio of wideouts should get a majority of the looks and leave Schultz with the scraps. Only time will tell if the scraps are enough to make him fantasy relevant this year. His current ADP is 137 on ESPN and 106 on Sleeper. He's being drafted in rounds 9 through 11 in most mocks. And the last guy in this tier is Jake Ferguson. The current Dallas Cowboy tight end had a quiet but productive season after the departure of Schultz prior to last year. Ferguson ended up averaging 10.4 points per game last season. He had 9 games of double digits and 8 points with single digits. His scoring was as split can get in fantasy terms at the position. Another year in the Big Mike offense, along with Dak slinging the ball, should allow Ferguson to produce even more this year, and that is with CeeDee Lamb back. With him back, Fergie should still benefit a little more with Pollard gone and Elliott. Ferguson should be the number 2 option in the passing game with Brandon Cooks at third. Ferguson's ADP is 101 on ESPN and 86 on Sleeper. He's projected to be drafted in the 7th through 9th rounds in most leagues. Tier 4 has 2 guys on it. Both have questions tied to their names this year. Due to the unknown surrounding these questions, they could break out this season or they may end up taking back seats on their respected offenses. This tier is Brock Bowers and Cole Kmet. Brock Bowers was the first round pick of the Raiders this year, so it's evident that they have a lot of faith in him and plan to use him right away. What is concerning to me is we don't know quite how that will look, as they drafted Michael Mayer in the 2nd round last season. With 2 young, highly sought-out tight ends in the last 2 drafts, it makes it hard to know how their usage will be split and how they plan on using said usage. The Raiders have come out and said that they've lined up Bowers at fullback, at times receiver, and tight end during training camp. So they all obviously plan to use him, and they are going to be using 2 tight end sets. We don't know what Bowers looked like in fantasy terms for a few more weeks, but due to his collegiate career, his highly sought-out draft stock, and what we've heard from the Raiders so far, he should be able to make an impact at some point this season. It just might not be right off the bat. Bowers' current ADP is 111 on ESPN and 79 on Sleeper. He is currently growing in rounds 8 through 10 in most mocks. And then we have Cole Kmet. The Chicago Bears coming off the 2nd consecutive top 10 season at his position. This is due to the great connection he showed with quarterback Justin Fields. Well, Fields is gone. He also is the number 2 option in offensive coordinator Luke Getsy's pass attack. Well, Getsy's gone. With a new quarterback in Caleb Williams and a new OC in Shane Waldron, we don't quite know yet how Kmet will figure into the game plans. To make things worse, the Bears loaded up on offense this offseason. With Allen, Odunze, and Swift, now he looks like to be the 4th or 5th option on the team instead of the 2nd. To make matters worse, he now has a real threat to lose snaps for the first time since becoming a starter with the signing of Jared Everett at tight end, who is very familiar with Shane Waldron's offense back to their Seattle days. There are a lot of unknowns surrounding Kmet this season, and if he can pick up where he left off last season, then great, but I could see that being harder than it looks. Moving on to Tier 5, we have one guy and one guy only. No one does what he does, and due to that, there's no one comparable. The Swiss Army knife of the New Orleans Saints, Taysom Hill. Listed as a tight end and a quarterback, but ends up looking more like a running back by the end of the games. Hill has been able to produce wherever he is needed. Due to this, he has had 7 games of double-digit points and 9 of at least 8 last season. What ends up hurting Hill is his usage is sporadic, and nobody knows what it will look like on a game-to-game basis. With Derek Carr the starter at quarterback and Juwan Johnson the starter at tight end, it doesn't leave much for Hill to get to playing time needed to be at a higher tier in my book. Hill has an ADP of 166 on ESPN and 169 on Sleeper. He's projected to go in the last few rounds or not at all, and this is entirely due to his limited usage. Finally, we have the sixth and last tier. And this tier is literally everyone else. The rest of the guys should be later round picks, as they have either only shown flash in the pan games here and there, are veterans past their primes, or rookies not named Brock Bowers. I can see a few of them putting together some double-digit games in a row and are more intriguing than others due to their skills and the situations they are in. The first guy I'm going to focus on is Hunter Henry. New England Patriot tight end has done most of his fantasy work in the red zone, being a threat in the red all the way back to his Charger days. Due to this, he's a hit or miss when it comes to the consistent points. He is coming off a career low in targets, receptions, and yards, but hopefully the quarterback change can help, as the last 2 seasons with Mac Jones and Bailey Zappi have been statistically his worst as a starter on either team. With no big-name receivers on the Pats, whoever the starting quarterback is week 1 or throughout the season, they will most likely be using Hunter Henry as a security blanket. I would say that his best chance to succeed is with Drake May, but Jacoby Brissett and even Joe Milton would be better than what he has seen in the recent past. His ADP is 168 on ESPN and 174 on Sleeper. After that, the next guy up is Juwan Johnson. The other Saints tight end is one who actually plays tight end. Johnson had some pretty high expectations last year due to the offseason buzz around Carr and his chemistry and how he performed prior year with Andy Dalton. Those expectations fell flat quite quickly due to his injury-plagued season by both Carr and Johnson. With both of them finally healthy at the end of the year, we finally got a glimpse of what we were hoping for. Over the last 4 games of the season, Johnson averaged 14.1 points per game. There's a chance that they may be able to pick up where he left off, especially now that slot receiver Michael Thomas is gone. Johnson's current ADP is 193 on ESPN and 272 on Sleeper. Moving on, we have Mike Gesicki. He had an awful season last year with the Patriots, replacing Jonnu Smith on the Pats brought Gesicki the same production as Smith. None at all. England preferred Hunter Henry for a while, so anyone else's really was just an afterthought. Gesicki should have been more productive season ahead of him now that he's the top tight end on the Bengals. Ever since Joe Burrow entered the league, he's made his tight ends thrive, to an extent. Just look at CJ Uzomah and Hayden Hurst's time with the Bengals. It's now Mike's turn. He won't have a high ceiling, but his floor won't be as low as others either. His current ADP is 213 on Sleeper, and he's unlisted on ESPN's rankings. If he needed a tight end available in round 16 that maybe outperform what's expected of him, he could do the trick. Up next is Greg Dulcich. The Denver Bronco tight end is going into year 3. He showed promise in year 1, but missed the majority of last year due to injury. He has now looked really good this preseason, and it seems that his injury-rid season is behind him. With rookie Bo Nix, the new quarterback in the Mile High City, it should help Dulcich overall production. Look for Nix to get the ball out to Dulcich in the middle of the field and Sutton on the outside. The only thing that hurts the chances is that Sean Payton prefers Adam Trotman as a blocker, so he will eat into Dulcich's playtime. His ADP is 293 on ESPN and 249 on Sleeper. He's going in the last couple rounds in larger leagues. The last couple tight ends in this tier are in great situations but have serious competition for snaps on their own teams. I'm not sure who will be the better fantasy option come the end of the season. I'll be looking at the Packers and Commanders tight end rooms. The Packers have 2 great young tight ends in Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. Both were drafted a round apart in 2023. Musgrave became the starter and Kraft his backup, but as the season went on, Musgrave ended up with a lacerated kidney on the IR, and Kraft took over from there. From a fantasy standpoint, Kraft was the better fantasy tight end, averaging 9.9 points per game to Musgrave's 8. Now going into year 2, both tight ends have to contend with each other for targets, as well as new running back Josh Jacobs and their young core of receivers in Dobbs, Reed, Watson, and Wicks. It's hard to tell if either of them will be involved enough for fantasy purposes, but if injuries were to start adding up, they could be called upon to step up, and if one of them goes down, the other should have a chance to benefit from increased snaps. Musgrave's current ADP is 207 on ESPN and 141st on Sleeper. Kraft is 206th on ESPN and 257 on Sleeper. If you draft one of them, use one of your last picks or just have them on your waiver wire watch list. The Washington Commanders situation gives me deja vu. Past his prime Zach Ertz with a young tight end looming to take over for him if he goes down on an offense left by Cliff Kingsbury. Just this time, the young tight end is second-round pick out of K-State, Ben Sinnott. While Ertz is healthy, he will get a start due to his relationship with Kingsbury, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets injured at some point this year and Sinnott takes over producing from there, as he's done in the preseason. There shouldn't be as much competition for receptions on that team outside of McLaurin and Eckler after they traded Dotson last week. Whichever one is playing should receive ample attention from quarterback Jaden Daniels and Kingsbury's air raid offense. Zach Ertz is unranked at ESPN and 250th on Sleeper, and Sinnott's ADP is 290th on ESPN and 161st on Sleeper. You should be able to get these guys in the last round or through waiver wire as needed. If you ever have any fantasy questions or need some advice, don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll try to answer your questions in the mailbag section of my episodes. My email is flagrantfantasy, BELLER @gmail.com. Flagrantfantasybeller @gmail.com. Thank you.